Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet two friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something on the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or somebody you know would like to come on the show and have a chat with me, feel free to reach out to me on basically any social media that exists these days. And the easiest way to find them is go to isaacl.dev, and that'll give you the list of all the places that I'm at. So with that, I'm looking forward to my conversation. I'm always excited when I have a fellow speaker on the conference circuit. And we were chatting a bit before, and I said, "Hey, let's figure out how we can get these conversations into the stream." So I'm looking forward to continuing those conversations. And today, my guest is Paul Stack. Paul, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me on, Isaac. So I'm Paul. I'm the director of product at a company called Initiative, and like I'm very passionate about the DevOps system and the DevOps space, and I'm looking forward to having a great conversation today.
Yeah, no, we were chatting before we got started about I've been trying to solve this DevOps problem for a while now. And I think you're in that similar boat. I'm looking forward to having those conversations. But I want to really know for you how it got started. Like, do you recall when technology kind of first introduced itself to you, and when you realized it was like something that you wanted to do?
So I have a very strange late story into technology.
Sure.
I was at university studying biochemistry and toxicology, and I kind of realized that working in biomedical sciences was going to be incredibly boring.
Mm.
And I sort of had my way through university and changed on to very different degree paths. And then at the end, I was like, you know what, this is not. Started small, building some websites and working for some pieces. Got an opportunity in the UK for a company that was building an accessible site for patient information leaflets for blind people. And it was actually writing XSLT and XML. And what an introduction into technology, right? I'm shout
Yeah.
out to all those people who still write XSLT and XML. I mean, it's incredibly powerful at what it does. Don't get me wrong, but it was. I worked with a few people there who were working on the dots, and I sort of got keener and keener at sort of learning a little bit more about programming. And I worked as a .NET developer then for maybe 10 years after that, going through various companies. But I guess at the start it was a job. And sort of as I went through it, it became more of a passion because I was learning a lot more. It was pushing me outside. I was getting a chance to go to different places and meet different people. I worked at some very interesting companies. The last company that I worked at in the .NET ecosystem was OpenTable in the US, and they were like a huge company, and I had to go back and forward to San Francisco a lot, and I kind of thought at that point, you know what, this is actually quite fun. Going not only just going and meeting people at company, seeing different people, but actually travel to different countries and sort of it became a bit of a and so you that was in my sort of mid to late 20s,
Sure.
and I'm now in my early 40s. So I've been relatively recent in technology, but at the same time, it's been 20 years since I've been in it. So
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of those things too where I'll just ask this question. So, when did you realize? Like, imagine it's around the same time frame, but when did you realize that there's money in tech? Like that you could have a very solid career. Was it right at the same time, or was it once you started working and you started getting paychecks?
I mean, at the start, when I was working with XML and XSLT, it was like an hour late as
Yeah. Okay.
a
Okay.
self-employed contractor, and I was in my 20s who just dropped out of university in the UK, so I was I had no idea what I wanted to do, and started getting paid. It wasn't incredibly well, and then because I stayed with them for a while, they sort of gave me a full-time role, and it was very little compared to what developers would get now as a as a junior developer. But I was like, oh my god, I have no qualifications, and yet this company are willing to pay this amount of money. But it grows incredibly fast, especially in the UK when you go towards London. But outside of London, like development salaries are relatively low. And so I had like some great opportunities to be able to do it. But international companies is when I realized that the salary,
Yeah.
because the UK salaries are like probably half of what a salary would be, for example. So,
Sure.
once you go to working for San Francisco based companies, then you start to realize that there is actually a lot of money in IT, and that there is not just money in development, but like that you can actually, you have travel, you have conferences, you have like the whole like perk system that goes with it, healthcare, etc. So I kind of realized then that that was a thing, but it wasn't what intrinsically motivated me. It still doesn't intrinsically. I for me, and I startup. If I really worried about money and cared so much about money, I would work at a much larger company. But I enjoy like the freedom. I enjoy the stuff. So that's more important to me than the actual like amount of the end.
Yeah, no, I mean and the reason why I asked about the money thing is that I think that for a lot of people that didn't like grow up like knowing about technology is that the first paycheck is kind of is pretty surprising. I mean, if you grew up and your parents were computer programmers or your parents were in IT, like you probably had an idea that like, oh, you can have a comfortable way of life, right? Um, so so you start doing like these, I mean, and I'll just say this, like really exhausting exercises to start out, right? Like when do you remember like the first project that you worked on that that you actually, I don't want to say enjoyed, but you immediately were like, oh, okay, this is something that's far more interesting. Was it more like DevOps sort of stuff because that's what you got into, or was it more like something along the lines of like, yeah,
It was actually early days and maybe company two or company three, and it was like I was Wiz website like in .NET, and we were trying
oh,
to take advantage of MVC, like back when like ASP.NET MVC was a thing. I think it was MVC 2 or M3 we were using. That's how long ago it was. And like it was actually incredibly fun, like what we were actually building, and that interaction with like stakeholders and the business, and you know just the whole thing of like continually like learning from the end user and actually making the tweaks and the change, able to like see the metrics of how they were using it and like make it, feed it back into the product decision. It was kind of like that whole life cycle became incredibly interesting. And that's when I thought, Axe is something that you could learn from. This is something that you can push. And like assumptions that you make early on when you're building something, I learned that you have to go through those, learn
yeah.
and pick up the new pieces that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm like a similar thing where it's like I have to understand what the problem I'm trying to solve is. Like that's how I've always been. Like I was never really successful if somebody was like, "Hey, Isaac, do this," and I didn't really understand like the why. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I've kind of gravitated towards like this more like problem solving slash storytelling sort of thing in my career versus like, oh, here's a backlog of stuff I have to build and just build those things. I don't know if you're similar in that way too.
Yeah, I like my worst experiences at companies where when you just have a backlog of like
Yeah,
things
yeah,
to
yeah,
work on. Like my role system initiative now, I like we firstly like it's important to say we don't have a backlog of system initiative. We're kind of like how we work is like very different. We use Jeff Patton's user mapping
okay,
style
yeah,
scenarios where you come up with the opportunity that you actually want to like solve for the user, and then you give it a budget, and then you split that work down into a story map and you slice it so you can think about the releasables for the user, and then actually out of that story map, what is the actual how you actually spend the time to do that. So for us, everything is incredibly visual at System Initiative. We have boards like that have just like those opportunities that we read back, that we understand the problem, can see, and like for me, this feels the funnest way that I've built product. Because before, when you were just like getting tickets thrown across the wall, you just had GitHub issues to like work on. It's
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Like really getting to know your users. So like how it happens here at System Initiative is kind of different. And I started here at System Initiative as a software engineer, but I've changed to like run product day to day here. So it is my job to work with the engineering team to make sure that we understand that we're sort of aligned on the goals for the user, how we actually interact with the user, and what we measure, and how we actually go out and talk to the user with like user experience interviews. And it's incredible, refreshing way of doing it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree. And I think maybe that ties to maybe into the conversation about DevOps a little bit is like when when we talk about DevOps, it's all like, at least in tech, like we're very guilty of like just, hey, throw tools at the problem, right? And I think a lot of the conversation around DevOps is very much like, okay, what tools are you using in your CI CD process? Because for a lot of people, like DevOps just really turns into like shipping code faster. But we're talking about like this area of DevOps where it's like the planning perspective, like how we actually put together the sprints, how we put together the work that's going to ship that code faster. So do you like, and I think that, I'd love to get your thoughts as somebody who is in this space a bit more than I am. Like, do you think that we are inherently like really non-interested in the planning phase of DevOps and we just want to just get to the point where we're using tools to ship code faster?
So it's interesting, right? Like you talk to 100 people, first thing that's
Yeah.
a little bit here of DevOps. Okay, so like how it started was about people, a culture, about making sure that you created this culture where people could excel, people could actually do their best work to be able to deliver for the end user. Right now, you had incredibly successful companies that were doing this. Probably the most well known, like in my like time in DevOps, was Etsy. Okay, Etsy were just created software that allowed them to be able to do like hundreds of deploys a day, and they built this off every operations person. That is the pinnacle, the panacea of how you deliver software, and like they were incredibly, like over years it's kind of changed a little bit, right? Because when you have a shift in technology, kind of like there follows the money signs. Okay, there follows the ability where people can create an ecosystem of tools, and like that's what happened, right? There was an explosion of tools in the DevOps ecosystem, and not just that, people who had tools were rebranding their own tools as a DevOps tool because they could actually get into that ecosystem. What happened? Now, you speak to the DevOps purists, and they will still maintain that it is about people and it is a sort of way of working. But you speak just pure software delivery and about putting together the pieces like of software delivery. But it kind of it kind of got a bit weird, right? Because DevOps became this chance, right? Because if a company wasn't doing DevOps, then they were kind of not sort of new. They weren't able to hire the best talent. They weren't
Yeah.
weren't able to do this. I don't remember this, but this is what happened first. They were agile, right? You needed to be agile, and you were hiring agile developers, and you were saying that we worked in an agile way, and evolution means people in this, it kind of became strange because people weren't implementing their own tools workflows. They were just copying other people's tools workflows
Yeah.
incredibly
Yeah.
successfully.
Yeah.
And that's where we've got into the stage now where if you ask different how is DevOps going, how are their like things working, you'll have a huge amount of people that says it's going great, but you'll have a huge amount of people, or you'll have another amount of people that'll say it's actually a bit of a nightmare for us. Like it's got slower, like it's got difficult to deploy tools. And like we have the Dora report where the metrics are actually sort of summator, and you can go and read that. And the DevOps Dora report has actually changed. So you know now if you're deploying once a month, you're actually class high competence team. Whereas like the goal of DevOps was to commit that you would actually basically be able to deliver that to the end user. And we've gone from a high performance to once a month at what you
Yeah.
do. And that sort of smells that something's wrong in there, that something's not quite right in that system at the moment.
Yeah, and you know, it's and this kind of continues on the conversation where I mean, you mentioned things at the door report, right? And there's all sorts of different like surveys or assessments that exist out there. I like to curiously get your thoughts. Like, how effective are those at getting the point across? It's like these are inherently their culture and organizational changes that a company needs to instill to be effective in DevOps or to be effective in developer productivity or what have you, instead of just hyper focusing on, like we were talking about a bit earlier, like tools trying to solve the problem. How good are they at telling the story? Or is it literally just a thing that people end up reading and then making their decisions based off of it?
Yes, it's something that people decisions off, but at the same time, like the door report has a quick check. Okay. And it literally like has the four items that are like right out there. It's like lead time, how fast that you can actually get something from into production, how many times a day do you actually deploy or how often do you deploy? When you do deploy something, how long does it, how many times have you required a fix or a bug fix or a rollback? Excuse me, or how long does it take if when like systems go down, systems go wrong. So there are like some really easy quick markers that can help a company understand. But like if you took the Dora report today and you scored top, 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 that doesn't necessarily mean you're like amazing at DevOps, right? That could be like, how do you classify bug fixes? How do you classify rollbacks? How do you, maybe you don't even know that there are bug fixes that you need to make. Maybe you're blind to the metrics in production. It's kind of a quick indicator. And I think sometimes people like take these types of reports like too in depth, too seriously, rather than using it as a tool in their belt. And that's kind of like where I feel that sometimes it will be a bit more difficult.
Yeah. No, I mean, we were talking about a little bit of this before we got started, right? Like this whole idea that, you know, it's really, really hard for us as technologists to kind of do the things that we don't want to do. I'll just say it. And we think about things like when I think of it as like what are the plights of being a developer? It's like, oh, I got to write test cases, I got to write documentation, I got to work with product to make sure that like we're hitting the right deliverables in these particular timelines. And at the end of the day, like I just want to write code. So the question that I have to you is, as somebody who's in product, like how do you keep engineers happy, knowing that like your kind of job is to kind of funnel them into doing buckets of work to ship product when all they really want to do is write code?
Oh, what a great question. So I guess for me, it's alignment, right? Because if you're aligned on the problem that you're trying to solve and you really understand what that user problem is, like you try and bring that alignment closer to the developer so they understand that direct connection with the business and what they're actually trying to solve. So sometimes in my career specifically when I've been writing code, I'm told to write this code because I have to solve a problem, but I don't actually know the
Yeah.
holistic problem. I don't know what it is end to end, and more importantly, I don't know how that impacts the business. Okay, so how we do it at System Initiative is we actually like we try and like bring that sort of holistic view, that sort of real understanding about what you're building and why it matters into the development lifecycle. And the developers like are kind of in control of how things go together, right? Because me in product, I can tell them what the problem is they need to solve. How they break it down to be how they deliver it for a user. Yes, they probably get some user UX prototypes that they have to follow for like some UI guidelines. But the implementation for them is up to themselves. I'm not. I still write code. I still kind of class myself as a developer in some respects, but I don't tell them what to write. I don't tell them how to architect it. And they can use their creativity in order to go and solve the problem that we give them. And I think that's the key part, right? Because if we just say, hey, go and write this code, it's going to be incredibly boring. They're not going to be really in tune with what we're doing. But because we are giving them that creative space, that scope to really be able to like do things in a better way, be able to drive things forward for a customer, future scope what we're doing, use the technologies to be able to do it. It becomes kind of fun for a developer to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's so hard, man. Like, I think at the end of the day, like everybody has the same goal, but I think that the prioritization or like the goals to get to the goal are a bit different. And like, as somebody who's been in marketing for a good amount of their career, like it's even more fascinating because like product and marketing need to work together to get the word out. And sometimes I feel like product at times can think of marketing as kind of like this thing they have to do to like check boxes, right? And like I understand that like to a lot of people like marketing isn't the most exciting thing ever, or and to a lot of people it can be just kind of an annoyance. But I think one of the things that I would like to hear from you, like somebody in product, is like, you know, how effective, or let's phrase it this way: how can marketing better support product to get to the end goal, which is getting as many eyes in front of the product as possible?
Like if you go back to like how these parts of the business interact, okay, we've kind of been in a situation where for a while it's been broken. Okay, so
Yeah,
you have bad alignment between like different departments have meant that you've had to plan months in advance, quarters in advance, so much, and it's very difficult to change tact. It's very difficult to be agile towards what the users, okay, like, and we could see this for many years, like between operations teams, engineering teams, and QA teams, right? You would kind of like throw these software packages across the wall, and like if things broke, you'd have to go back to the start, and it made your cycle time incredibly long to be able to get these like products out to your end users. I think like we're in this new era now where you have sort of product led growth, which kind of means that like everybody is a lot more aligned to be what's going on, and like like product teams are not that they run the show, they absolutely don't. It's more about the fact of the product itself like is kind of the key thing. And as these teams sort of become more aligned with what they're doing and be able to be more agile with what's happening, I think it becomes incredibly effective. Now, I do think that we kind of like went off in a bit of a tangent, like DevRel, the developer relations, kind of.
mm,
I don't know. It kind of became a bit weird for a while.
sure,
Like there were people like just using DevRel as a travel budget, and like they
sure, yeah, yeah,
weren't incredibly passionate about the products that they were marketing, and it kind of almost led to like a little bitterness between the departments. Where you had like DevRel team who were just traveling the world conferences, not really bringing any substantial information back to engineering or products so they can make products better, but spending the money to be able to do it. And like it kind of feels that we're starting to change that again, like um whether for the right reasons or not, but it should be the DevRel developer relations is very much a case of they are like basically your primary marketers, right? They're the people who are out speaking to the users of your tools at conferences. They're out there, the people that are sort of leading, going and talking on the company's behalf. They're kind of shining light. And if it's a situation where there's no passion, they don't understand the product, then it reflects poorly on marketing for the entire organization. And I think there was kind of this sort of friction between the teams. I think that's changing now, and I think we're starting to get back to actually it's passion that's driving a lot of the product. It's passion that's driving a lot of the marketing, and I think we're getting into a good place again.
yeah,
I do believe that you know it's probably the huge surface area of conferences. Like Isaac, you and I were talking about like the Node ecosystem, the JavaScript ecosystem. There's
yeah,
thousands and thousands of conferences. So like the hiring pool is incredibly small, right? Whether
yeah,
we like it or not, like if you want a top developer or a top like DevRel person or a top ops person, there's a relative like small amount of people who would fit that niche. Of
sure,
course,
yeah, yeah,
it's great that we have a lot more people in the junior side of the roles who are pushing into like learning and growing. But if you want like a really established person, it's pretty small. So to hire them, you're going to have to pay money.
Yeah.
But like if you're throwing money at them, they're not joining because of passion, potentially. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And there's always exceptions to that rule. And I think that's kind of where we're a little like shy here. It's where we've kind of gone that there's no synergy between the teams. There's no shared vision. There's no goal of what we're trying to achieve. And I think we're starting to get back to being in that vein right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the things that is challenging, at least from my perspective, and I'm excited, I mean, I like the fact you brought up DevRel too, because I think that for a lot of folks externally, they see DevRel as, like you said, like marketing, but like with travel included. Um, but I think one thing that's really fascinating is all these teams trying to work together, and they all have like different goals, and they're also like targeted and metriced on different goals. Like in marketing, we care a lot about like leads, like getting people like into the traditional marketing funnels. In product, you care a lot about roadmap, and you care a lot about acceleration to release. And engineers, they care a lot about like bugs and issues and things like that, code commits. And in the sales side, I feel like everybody knows what sales cares about. Um, but like it's very fascinating to me that the people that are super successful in their jobs are the ones that are able to kind of coalesce between like in the middle of all these different all these different organizations, and be successful like talking the language to each. And that's one of the things I talk to a lot with people as they're getting started is like it's very important if you're going to be an engineer, or if you're going to be a product manager, or if you're going to be a product marketing manager. It's really valuable for you to be able to speak the language of some of the other groups that you're partners with, because that person who is the translator between them, like they're essential in every meeting, because you have these two different groups and they have like different goals, and you really need like that glue to figure out like how these two different orgs operate together, and like how they scratch each other's back.
Yeah. Like for me, I'm incredibly lucky because I've been a developer, I've then been an ops person, and now I'm in product. So I'm able to like bring a bit of an engineering sort of twist to how I think about product, especially from my background. Like system initiative is in the DevOps space. It's trying to reimagine how like systems are built, infrastructure is built, like all of these pieces. And like my experience of working with other tools in the ecosystem sort of brings a perspective with it. And it brings like I hesitate to say the word that it brings like some of the pain in some of those other tools or the other ecosystem, but it certainly
Yeah.
does. Some of the things I've learned from speaking to customers, from speaking to users, like it's a chance to do things differently. So it gives me an incredibly unique perspective to be able to do this. But the fact that I'm a developer as well as a product person and I enjoy going and speaking to end users, it sort of means that I like fill these sort of like all of these roles together
Yeah.
to be able to bring that back. Like I'm talking at a conference next week. Okay. When I go to the conference, I'm going to talk about I'm going to have hallway track talking about how we're trying to solve DevOps in a different way.
Yeah.
People are going to bring perspective. I can bring that perspective directly to the engineering team, directly to the other people in product system initiative. And I think that's where yes, every part of the organization is metric driven and every part of the organization has their own goals. But unless they're sort of aligned on the business objective of what they're actually trying to achieve, then there's not going to be that great outcome, even if they are aligned, so to speak. So, and I think that's the key here. The key is like, what is it you're trying to solve? How do you do it for a user, and how you can learn from the user that is there? And I think it's a difficult situation. Like the larger the organization, the more difficult that is, right? And it's like
Yeah.
it just so happens that the larger organizations have to practice being even more aligned. Their culture has to allow it. But if you end up with a situation where you have some people who are not aligned, or they don't follow that same culture within your org, then it becomes really difficult to solve this problem.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it only gets harder like the larger a company gets, right? Because I think when companies first start, like I've seen this enough at enough startups that I've had conversations with that I've just observed. It's like there's a founder, maybe a handful of founders, and they want to get code out to market as fast as possible. They want to get their MVP out there. And then eventually, like they have some structure. They need, okay, we actually need like proper product people to put structure around it. And then we need sales. And then like the last thing they add on is marketing, which I think is always kind of interesting to me. And I've always asked, like, I'll just say this, like I've interviewed a fair amount of startups, and I always talk to the founders and ask them, well, why are you doing marketing now? And their response was, oh, we seem to think that this is the opportune time in the evolution of the company, blah blah blah. And I said, well, you already have a pretty strong sales team. How has that sales team been effective? You already have like a very proper sized product team. How is that product team be effective without having like some marketing channel? And it's always interesting hearing their thoughts. And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. Like I know the systems initiative is a bit bigger than like startup style, right? Like very very early startup. But like, when do you think is the proper time to build like certain functions of a business?
So it's super interesting, right? Um, we're actually relatively small as a company. Like we're really small. The entire company is 18 people.
Sure.
Okay. And like most of that is engineering. Okay, so I think 10 or 11 is engineering. You have like COO or CEO or VP of Eng, like an EA, you have our VP of Biz Dev, and then like, a user experience person and myself. So we're really small, but it means we have to be incredibly disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
And our COO is like, his thoughts are, I'll bring salespeople on when I have built the processes that allow the salespeople to come in and actually be effective at what they do. So, like, he right now is the person who's driving a lot of that. He's putting together those processes. Once those processes get to the point where he can actually make people successful at what they're actually doing, that's at the point of which we'll actually be able to, bring somebody in. Because if you bring people into an early startup and you don't sort of allow them to be successful, or you don't give them the tools that allow them to be successful, then they just become sort of, either things drift or things get done in a way that sort of doesn't fit the needs of the business, or coherent with other parts of the system. So it's very much a case of, as an org grows, you have to sort of work incredibly hard to keep that sort of culture, that sort of discipline of how things are done, that like real sort of flow of information, that real alignment. And that's like what we're working incredibly hard at System
Yeah.
Initiative to make happen.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating, and for what it's worth, I didn't know you folks were that size. I thought you were a bit bigger, just based on like the things that I see. Like it's to your point, like you have to be very very controlled in what you're doing, but it seems like you're operating at a much larger size than you are. I think one
And
thing.
it's
Good.
funny because we have a couple of operations people or infrastructure people here at System Initiative, and some of the systems that we have at 18 people are more sophisticated than companies I have worked at where there's 100 people. Because we've put together the right sort of goals of what we're trying to achieve, the right pieces. And if you do that really early, then people build upon that, and it becomes incredibly, it becomes kind of ingrained in what you do. It becomes ingrained in your hire, and it becomes all of these pieces. And that's sort of why taking advantage of putting together these early processes. And I'm not saying that they have to be incredibly stringent or they have to be like huge playbooks. It's just about, taking heed, being really sort of diligent in what you're doing. They have to be fast. They have to be like not monotonous or boring. They just have to get the job done. And if you're good at that as a startup, you can accelerate really fast with hiring.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, I think, and one of the things that I'd like to kind of transition the conversation to is to like, we've talked a little bit about what you've been doing at System Initiative, but like, maybe talk a little bit about what they are as a company and like the problem in this space they're trying to solve.
So like the problem we're trying to solve is the fact that like infrastructure as code, or the DevOps ecosystem, has kind of been an evolution. Each tool has been an evolution of itself.
Sure.
Okay, now they're all stand on. I'm not going to say they're all like stand on the shoulders of each other and they're all like sort of making each other better, but they're kind of following a similar path. Okay, I gave a conference talk about this like last year, like, and I've given it quite a few times. What actually happens here is that they focused on a specific way of doing things. Okay, so like a declarative state. Okay, where you specify the infrastructure that you want and you sort of delegate the responsibility of how it gets there to the tool itself. And we sort of like evolved a little bit where we like language was brought into infrastructure as code so that you could be a bit more imperative in what you're doing. But ultimately, it was still imperative to be able to get you to that sort of end goal, that declarative state. But system initiative is thinking of things in a different way, okay? Because for a long, long period of time, we've kind of been told that infrastructure as code, what is in GitHub or in your source control is actually like your system of record. It is your truth. And that's not actually the case, okay? Because there are a number of factors that can influence your infrastructure or influence like how you build things, how you change things. And
Sure.
GitHub or source control or your DevOps pipelines or your CI/CD system, they all have to work. But more importantly, it's the infrastructure that exists in the real world is your source of truth. Okay, because it doesn't matter what's in GitHub. If that's not what's reflected in Azure, AWS, then it doesn't matter. If you're making a change in GitHub that overwrites something that has already been changed elsewhere, then it's incredibly difficult to look at things in a different way. We're actually trying to look at the infrastructure itself as the source of truth. Okay, so System Initiative sort of employs like being able to take advantage of high fidelity digital twins. Okay, so I'll give you an example here. You can't take a change to a Formula One car or a plane and just put that on the runway or on the track and just hope it works. Okay, because that would be catastrophic. That would not be the right outcome. Like you just know what would happen. And the same kind of thing happens with infrastructure, right? Like we have our infrastructure as code tools, and we can have our linters, and we can have like our we can check that the DAG the graph actually looks correct. But if there's no simulations or if there's no checks against the real world, or we actually really try and understand how that influences or what risks that would have against real world infrastructure, then you're kind of getting this unidirection, right? You're just pushing changes out. You're not letting the real world influence the changes that you're at. So like at System Initiative, we have two sides. Okay, we have what is running in the real world, and we call that a resource. And then we have what is in our simulation or in our system, which is the component. And we then employ like functions that actually sync the data either between each one. So it doesn't matter how things were actually built or how things were like put together. You can take real running infrastructure, import it into System Initiative, and then simulate changes that you may want to make in the real world, and it'll tell you how it's actually going to affect it. So, for example, if you change a security group, we have a graph that shows you that it's going to change these 45 other services that's in place, but you're doing it in a way where it's in the equivalent of a chain set. Like think of it as a branch in GitHub,
Sure. Sure.
and you can actually safely then understand what it's doing. You can write the test that you need to do, and then once you're happy, you merge that into head, what we call it, and then head actually syncs itself out into the real world.
I mean that's fascinating. I think in when I think about this, I'm thinking about like the target audiences, people that have like a background like an IAC, right? Like they have an infrastructure as code background. They maybe they were systems administrators, or maybe they were asked to build something. But I'm curious as to your thoughts is like, how does this make the developer experience a bit better? Because one of the things that I've seen over the last few years is that developers are falling more and more into like categories of like doing DevOpsy sort of things, and even to the effect that like some companies are like, okay, well, devs are responsible for like defining what the environment looks like, and they build like an IAC or some other mechanism, and they hand that off to the ops or the systems administrator folks who kind of make sure that everything looks good, and they deal with the scaling, they deal with like the redundancy, all of those sort of things that falls onto the upside, and then that's how things get sent out. So like tell me a little bit about how like developers can take advantage of this.
So you said a very key thing there. You said like They send like this equivalent to check that it looks good. Okay.
Yeah.
And in declarative code, it's very difficult to see how things look good, right?
Sure.
Because
Sure.
it's incredibly difficult to do. So what we do at the initiative, we actually provide the ability to be able to see a visualization of what your infrastructure looks like and a visualization of how the relationships happen. So like, for example, if you were creating a VPC in Amazon, okay, like the parts of a VPC are the actual VPC itself, the subnets, the route tables, the route table associations, the routes, all of these different pieces. Now you could look at that in declarative code and you'd have to decipher how it goes. You could jump around between resource blocks. If you think of it in terms of like Bicep, or you think of it in terms of Terraform or Pulumi or something like that, then you need to have tooling in place to be able to follow. You can step into one declarative resource and then you can follow its reference to the next piece of information. But it becomes incredibly difficult to understand to spot checks. You write linters, like you use tools that are provided by the companies that actually give them. Like what we're doing at System Initiative is actually visualizing the actual infrastructure itself. So when you're designing your flow, and in System Initiative, we don't care how your data gets into System Initiative. Okay. For us, it's important that we give you the engine to do that. So we'll have SDKs, we have APIs. You can actually build it directly in the UI. We're changing the way the UI works in order to make that even simpler and easier to do. But once it's in there, you can then visualize it, you can simulate it, you can automate it, you can change it, you can understand how it works, how it goes. And that's the important thing. So like System Initiative isn't just an infrastructure as code tool, it's far sort of past that. It is much more of an automation platform that
Hmm.
allows you to be able to take care of like complex workflows
Yeah.
and then be able to filter and slice the data in whatever way you want. So you as a developer, if you care about these 5 pieces of infrastructure, you would create your own view of those pieces of infrastructure. And I could have my own view as an ops person, but we'd still be working in the same graph. We'd still
Hmm.
be working collaboratively in the same workspace. And that's the key point. Once it's in there, you can slice it, you can automate it, you can do the different pieces that you need. You can even templatize it and call it from outside. So for us, it's about giving that platform that you can get that data. So it's about turning infrastructure into data. And once you have that data, you can slice it and like change it in whatever way you need to.
Mm. No, that makes a ton of sense. And you mentioned a word that kind of triggered me. And we were talking about a little bit this before we got started. You mentioned the word platform. And, it's not like you're defining a lot of things that if you talk about the platform engineering concept, right? It's about giving developers more autonomy to build sort of these environments in a way that accommodates kind of the standards and the policies that you have as a part of an IT organization. Um, but I don't want to kind of bucket systems initiatives into like this, like, oh, it's a platform engineering platform or platform engineering play. Like, so maybe talk a little bit about, you know, as an antithesis to that statement. It was like, okay, well, this is just like platform engineering SaaS service, right? Like that's a gross oversimplification, but I'd love to kind of hear your rebuttal to that.
Okay, so platform engineering is a very interesting concept where people have created layers of abstraction over infrastructure as code so that like they can allow developers to be able to do self-service. Okay.
Sure, sure.
That's a gross simplification of it. Please
Yeah,
take
yeah,
it
yeah.
like that, because like a total gross simplification of it. But like what the situation that you're in is that you have an abstraction over an infrastructure as code tool, which is an abstraction over the cloud, right? So you got to learn the abstractions the whole way down. If you're at the mercy of like something changing in the cloud provider, it has to firstly make its way into the infrastructure as code tool, then it has to make its way into like your own abstraction within your platform as code tool. When I talk about a platform here for System Initiative, like for us, it's about creating this sort of set of integrated tools that sort of allow people to work collaboratively within the workspace. Now, our diagram is one way of creating that. An API is another way of creating that. We have GitHub Action support. We have like any sort of driver that allows people to be able to manipulate the data that they need to be able to do it is care. So for us, it's about that, and it's about the ability that you can create your own. If you really want to, you can create your own layers of abstraction within System Initiative and you can drive those from outside. it's about giving people that place where they can amalgamate the data and actually manipulate the data that they need.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's funny because we both said like we're oversimplifying platform engineering because platform engineering is this huge concept around it's we joked at the before we got started. It's kind of like the it's kind of like the new modern version, or modern because DevOps is modern. It's like the next evolution in DevOps, right? It feels like we had DevOps and then we had like DevSecOps, where all of a sudden it's DevOps plus security, yay! And now we're in this platform engineering thing where it's like, okay, how do we not just build out like our systems that are in the cloud, but how do we build out our systems for developers to be able to be successful? Um, I think one of the things too that I would love to get your thought on is like we talked a little bit of this before we get started as well. There's a trend. We talked about a lot of stuff before we got started that I wanted to talk on the show, like on the actual show, is like how AI comes to play in all of this. Like, I think it's very, in my opinion, AI is here to help. It's not here to replace, no matter what anybody says. But tell me a little bit, like, especially in the space of DevOps, where, a lot of the real problems in the DevOps world are like squishy things, people things, management things, what have you. But like on the tooling side, like AI can help a little bit. So, like, what are some of the things that you think about when you think about how AI can kind of streamline the DevOps ecosystem for companies?
So, like, firstly, it's important to say that like AI for me is a power player within like a company within an org. Like, if you're good at being able to like use AI to what you're doing, it's very cool, right? Like you can like tell Claude Code to go and do anything that you need to do, but you have to give it the right instruction to be able to do it.
Yes.
Like AI needs that context. Now,
Yeah.
that's the key point. Context is the key point. Now, if you look at an AI tool where like you can say, give me a Kubernetes cluster, it needs to have three nodes in the node group. It needs to have the ALB ingress controller in Amazon. It needs to have X service. It needs to have this version of a CNI. It needs to have this security group profile. AI will give you that. No problem whatsoever. It will churn through the Terraform code, the Bicep code, the Pulumi code to be able to do that, the CD code, whatever. And that's brilliant. Okay. Firstly, it probably doesn't have the context about the environment that you're in. Okay.
Sure.
So it'll make assumptions based on what style of ecosystem you're in. It might not even ask you what current resources do you have, like how does this need to fit in with the current infrastructure that you have. You're not able to probably feed it all the context to do. It'll churn you out a Terraform script and you have to go and manipulate that Terraform script yourself to be able to make it. And I think that's kind of where AI has become problematic in the fact that people are like, oh, this is great. Like, I can add an infrastructure as code AI replacement and it's going to be fun. It's going to do all the work that it needs. It doesn't give you day two operations, right? So
Yeah.
I said, give me the Kubernetes cluster that's going to do this. Now, if you've heard that Kubernetes is hot and you just want to ask AI, give me a Kubernetes cluster that I can deploy my applications into, it hasn't told you the complexities of Kubernetes. It hasn't told you like how to manage day two operations of Kubernetes. It hasn't told you how to secure Kubernetes.
Sure.
So it
Sure.
kind of sort of has led you into a path where it's giving you the code that's going to cause you potential problems in
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
future. And I think that's where some people are falling afoul of AI, right? They're asking it questions that they could probably get answers from Google rather than actually using it as like, a pairing developer or another sort of player within their organization. And I think it's gonna probably change over the next sort of couple of years. We see a lot of like companies starting to create MCP servers so that you can get a little more context and you can
Sure.
feed it the context within your org. So I think this early player of AI in the infrastructure as code space or in the DevOps ecosystem is drastically going to change when the tools become sort of more mature, when they actually can like you can give it them and it work with you rather than actually just telling it to do specific pieces of information.
No, I agree. I think, and as we wrap up, I think one of the things that's really important for me is like, ensuring that we have lots of people in technology that are curious about these things because they are here to make our lives a bit better. And I think that if we immediately cast them off as like, oh, this is the new thing that is going to show up and it's going to disappear, um, I know as me, as somebody that has written code and I've worn different hats as a part of like the code lifecycle, right? Um, Anything that can exist that can make my job a bit more effective, like I'm gonna take full advantage of. Like I'm late. I'll inherently say I'm very lazy. So like my goals are always to like what tools can I use to like not be lazy, or not, or to like basically augment my laziness. And I'm curious to know is like as we wrap up, what are some of the things that you think about when you're looking to build out kind of like this idea of like how you can be a better like technologist? Like, what are some of the things you think about?
Sorry, Isaac, my stream just like died there, and I apologize. So you
Yeah, no
said
worries.
about you to be a better technologist, is that right?
Yeah. No, I was genuinely curious as to like what you think about, and I'll just start from the beginning, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, how can we use all, like we talked about a lot of stuff on this show. Like we talked about DevOps, we've talked about IAC, we've talked about all the squishy things around it. We talked a little bit about AI, we talked about a lot of different things. And I'd like to get your thoughts is like how can we kind of use all of these things? So that I'll say this, like all of these technology concepts, they're very much, they're all coalescing together. And like I remember when we had very separated concerns as technologists, and now it seems to me like we're getting more and more to the effect where it's like you kind of have to know a little bit of everything. So my
Yeah.
question to you is like, what is what do you think like the future of like a technologist is? Is like, are we still going to have front end developers, back end developers, ops people, DevOps engineers? Are we going to have like a lot of people that just do know like a lot of different segments of how that we get things to production?
So I really think like we're always going to be in this ecosystem where you have areas of specialism. Okay. Like I I think those people who have those areas of specialism are going to influence the tooling that we have. Like,
Mm,
you can't really like train an incredible AI tool without giving it like the context, without giving it the prompt that you need. And you need like that specialism to do it. Like I couldn't teach an AI tool how to like do really well with my own database within System Initiative, right? But I have incredible people that I work with who know the database, they know Postgres inside out, back to front, to be able to do the different pieces that it needs. So, like, I think what'll happen is you'll continue to have those areas of specialism, and like those will become sort of even more prominent. Like databases aren't going away, right? But you still need people who know how to performance tune a database. But then you'll have the generalism like area within like IT or within software engineering, I think is going to become like you'll use a lot of these tools to help you get the job done. And it's again, it's about these tools being used to like facilitate faster like development, in order to ensure like customers are serviced faster and be able to get like changes out quicker and better. And I think that's going to be the way that we're going to trend. Like I will happily use an AI tool that if I have to ask it, what is that way that I have to like write the function? I can never remember how to do it. I'll happily do that. Like, there's no shame in me actually be able to do it, because if an AI tool can tell me in 30 seconds, then I don't need to have to think about it. I can go on with actually trying to solve the problem. And I think we're going to get more and more into that way of thinking where these tools are there to help us. They're not there to replace us.
yeah, no, I fully agree. I think that at the end of the day, you know our responsibility is to bring value, and anything that we can use to bring value is just icing on the cake. It's less work that we have to do, right? I mean,
Yeah,
i remember
100%.
I remember like my first introduction to DevOps was like doing things with like cruisecontrol.net. And like you had to
Yeah.
build like these really complicated build scripts and these hooks and all these things. And then Jenkins came out, and then all these other things started coming out. And then Visual Studio, or not, Team Foundation Server came out. And just like over the course of time, it just made my life easier because I had to care about less things. Um, Actually, that's probably not true. I did care about the same amount of things, but there were like less complexities in these particular areas. Like things were a bit more streamlined in my brain.
And not only that, you were able to use these tools to like take care of the things that you didn't have to think about all the
Yeah,
time. So like
yeah.
writing a cruise control.net script, you would have had to write it once at the start of a project and not have to write another one until a new project. If a tool can help you do that, why not lean into that tool being
Yep.
able to do it? Saves you from having to keep that space in your brain when you could use it for solving better problems that are actually more in tune with what the organization needs you to solve.
I totally agree. And this conversation has been awesome because as I talked about at the beginning, like we've met at least once or twice, and but it was good to actually sit down with you and have like a longer conversation about where your thoughts are in this area. Um, so as we wrap up, I want to thank the folks for were tuning in. If you want to like see more of what Paul's doing and what System Initiative is doing, like a good place is on Twitter X. You can find him at Stack72, STACK72. There'll also be some other links in the show notes for some other places to find him, as well as information about Systems Initiative. Um, Before we sign off, my friend, is there anything parting words that you'd like to say?
I mean, like, it's it's an incredibly interesting time in what we're doing. Like I remember when DevOps was in the rise and people sort of were a little bit afraid of it and it was going to replace operations and stuff like that. It definitely didn't pan out that that was the way. And the people who leaned into it early were the people who were incredibly successful with it. Like these types of tools, AI, like infrastructure as code tools, the new evolution of tools, lean into them. Like use them. They're there to make your job easier. They're not there to get in your way. They're actually there to like make your job fun again. Like sometimes we forget that. And I think that's like for me the most interesting part of what's going on in the ecosystem at this moment in time. I want to enjoy what I do. I don't want to have the same monotonous, boring job every day. Enjoy it like what you're doing for sure.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I want to thank you for coming on the show and chatting with me. I know we had a little bit of some hiccups earlier. I'll fix them, but it was good to chat with you, and I really appreciate it. And for the folks that were tuning into the stream live, and for the folks who are listening in the future, so my name's Isaac Levin. This has been Coffee and Open Source, and for my friend Paul, I want to wish you the good rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks so much, Isaac. Thank you.